The Auditor-General Kimi Makwetu is addressing the media in Parliament on national and provincial audit outcomes. Let's go live to that.
To the cut-off date. The last point on page 15, which I thought I will deal with, is the issue of the preventative measures that we think have now become a very important and significant consideration if we are to look at audit outcomes in the future and say this is typical of what we expect, because all the steps that are required to be put in place in terms of preventing financial losses have been put in place. As we communicated with leadership in the country across all these provinces and in the national sphere, as well as oversight in Parliament, including portfolio committees through the chair of chairs and many others, we have been putting an emphasis on this matter and saying that even if you've given the audit office additional powers, if you do not have preventative controls, it is no good just having those powers when nobody prevents financial losses from happening. And we are not trying to introduce something that's not there. If one looks very carefully at the PFMA in terms of its provisions, as well as what it says, the role and responsibility of an accounting officer and an accounting authority, specifically in section 38, you'll see that all of those things are about preventing financial losses from happening. And we do put an emphasis on this to say that many organizations control things, but sometimes they control them just because they are told to control something. For as long as you're not understanding what you are trying to control or you are trying to prevent, that control will not be good enough, because all you'll do, you'll just show the evidence of a signature on a piece of paper saying that I was required according to the approval framework to sign this document. Here's this document, I've signed it. That is not what the law requires. The law requires somebody to scrutinize this document they are signing, so that if there's an additional 10% that is being paid to a service provider over and above the amount contracted, that person can ask the necessary questions to prevent something that is unauthorized from being paid. That's what we think the system needs to put in place now, because if you've got that in place in large numbers everywhere, you'll get to a point where there are limited material irregularities. But it doesn't end there. It also comes to Parliament when departments and entities submit their quarterly financial information as required through legislation. The people who sit on the portfolio committee need to begin to empower themselves with questions that will prevent certain things from slipping their attention, because they are the ones who approve the annual performance plans. They are the ones who know what budgets are being spent, and they are better placed as oversight to deal with those matters from a preventative point of view. So we were very encouraged in the interaction we had with the chair of chairs, where all the portfolio committee chairs sit, where they made an undertaking. We have referred to it in this media release on the second last paragraph of the media release. Where we say we are also encouraged by the decision taken by the Committee of Chairs in the National Assembly upon presentation of these overall national audit outcomes. They have already decided to review and workshop the parliamentary oversight model to ensure that they deliberately incorporate some of the matters we have elevated through this report. This is to help strengthen the focus of portfolio committees. This interaction is planned for January-February 2020 as part of a comprehensive national response to these audit outcomes. I think the essence of this is that they've taken note of the fact that the in-year reports as well as the in-year monitoring process happens through their committees. But a lot of these things still slip through. And that's why they've also asked us to come and assist them as they navigate how they are going to reorientate the parliamentary oversight model through the workshop that they are talking about. So that's where we say that the preventative approach to dealing with these financial management issues for us is possibly the best. And it applies also to the likes of your internal audit and audit committees. Because in most instances, when you look at the annual reports of most departments that we report on, there's always a report of internal audit, there's always a report of audit committees, but they don't drill down enough to help identify what is it that was a deficiency while they were exercising their oversight over these entities. It is part of that instrument of oversight as well that we say it now needs to take on more preventative measures to make sure that very little slips through to a point where it becomes consistently adverse or consistently qualified. So that is the overall essence of this. And again, if one looks at our amendment as an overall comment now, it's also positioned as a preventative approach to dealing with issues of an audit. Because if I am an accounting officer and I've got nothing else to lose, and I know that when an audit starts, it might end up with a certificate of debt written in my name further down the line, then I will start thinking twice about how do I become effective in implementing those preventative controls that are there for an accounting officer. If I ignore it, then I know that I ignore it at my own peril. But if you know that the audit is going to end up with a very strong hand that will be supported at the right level of leadership, then many things could probably be accounted for properly, and they probably would pass the test of an independent audit. So thank you very much, and that is the end of our input for purposes of this year's audit outcomes.
Thanks, Adrian. Colleagues will now take your questions. We'll start here with a set of 4, and then we'll move to Pretoria. I see you, Linda, Marianne. 2 more questions. You introduce yourself and your media house.
Good morning, Mr. Makwetu. Linda Insel from Business Day. I'm just a bit confused about the total amount of fruitless and wasteful expenditure. The statement says 849 million for 223 auditees. Now, is that the total amount, or is there some other amount that for the rest of the auditees? If you could also just then confirm the unauthorized expenditure of 1.4 billion and the number of auditees, and also the worst and the best performing national departments, please. Thanks.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Marianne Merton from Daily Maverick. Your staff, how have they fared this year? In previous years we had reports of intimidation. I think there were incidents of attacks, even cars, things like that. What is the situation on that, and how is that being managed? And just a tiny clarification in terms of the timelines with regards to the 16 auditees that are already under the new power framework, for want of a better explanation. You said that the period for recommendations hasn't yet expired. When would that period expire? Because I'm thinking 1st of April, July. So if you could just clarify that. Thank you.
Have you found those numbers for fruitless and wasteful? All right. Okay. Let me start with the worst and best performing national auditees. We historically have not done that analysis, Linda, but I think in looking at the report, I'm sure you'll pick it up that there's a number of elements that contribute to somebody becoming the best performing versus someone being the worst performing. But my view on this one is that it will take getting into the report to actually make that determination, because we avoid making the comparison. There are a lot of things that are different between departments and that also are context specific with regards to trying to get who's the best and who's the worst. So I'm sorry I'm not able to give you names in respect of that. Then I'll come back to the one on the fruitless and wasteful expenditure and unauthorized expenditure. Let me deal with the ones Marianne raised regarding the staff intimidation. Once this thing reared its head, I think in 2017 or 18, we put in place a mechanism in the office to make people alert to instances where they feel threatened, even if it's not a real threat, because most threats do not necessarily come like that. We've got a reporting mechanism that is in place where staff do report those matters, and we do a follow-up, and we sometimes take steps to make sure that they are safe at an instance. But in terms of these audit outcomes, there was not much of that happened with regards to the PFMA cycle. In fact, what we experienced among these entities that we picked up for audit, there was a lot of cooperation from the accounting officers, especially in the PFMA cycle. The municipalities' audits are underway. Last week, you would have seen also the problems that we encountered with our staff at Nelson Mandela, where all of a sudden, when they arrived in the office where they do the audit work, there was an envelope that contained an article that was reported in the Weekend Post, which was an article about the rapid transport system audit that I think everybody who follows what happens with those transactions at Nelson Mandela knows that it's a matter that was reported on in previous years already. Now there was a matter pertaining to them not getting the tranche of their funding. And what was reported in that article was that part of the reason for it has to do with the issues that were reported in the audit. But it's history, it's stuff that pertains to previous years of audit work. So the staff was rattled because it was a case of, why put this article in this envelope and address it to us? Because in the article there was reference to some of the small, medium enterprises now feeling that if no fiscal resources are going to come their way, they might suffer. So it was almost a case of, it's not easy just to ignore something like this. It might happen that somebody is really trying to say, these audit outcomes that you issue are probably responsible for the fact that we might not get the money that we do. So this is the kind of things that we are now starting to see, because people are scared that these material irregularity provisions are now digging a lot deeper into places where such inquiries were not made before. But we do have a process to manage this. Hence, when we got the feedback on this one, it was within the day of getting the feedback that we said the staff must not return to Nelson Mandela Bay municipality. You'll see in one of the articles it says they were chased away. It was a case of don't return because you were not there. One person saw this, but the team was yet to go back. So we just said the team must please stay back and not go back to Port Elizabeth. So I'm sure you may have got an impression of people who were carrying their bags running away. No, that doesn't what is happening. It was just a 6K. To be safe, let's not go there. We will have an interaction with the leadership of the institution to say, if we are to proceed with this audit, you must also create an environment for our people to operate properly during the audit. The meeting was scheduled to happen this week sometime. I think they're still trying to find dates to make sure that that plan is put in place. But it will definitely be putting pressure on the completion of the Nelson Mandela Bay municipality audit, among others, because the audits are being signed off next week, and the team will probably not be done by the end of next week if they have not yet met with the leadership of the institution. The 16 auditees with regards to the expiry of the recommendation. The recommendation for the first phase, Marianne, we have not been hard and fast about those, but we have communicated through the audit with the accounting officer that we've got a limited time within which to deal with these matters, because there was a very small sample, and it was in the process of trying to also firm up those dates in the regulations that we are now updating as well, just to make sure that we've got sufficient time, because not every transaction will take 6 months to go through and 3 months to go through and investigate. Others will be large contracts that have got complex provisions that need to be unpacked once the recommendation has surfaced. So it might take longer than, so we can't have a standard date, and that's why we were trying to figure this out and used 3 months. But we believe that for many transactions, for example, if you made a prepayment, as an example, to a service provider, and you have not got the service yet that you are buying, and we have no doubt that here's money leaving the bank, and here's a debit put in the books as a prepayment, let's say of 20 million, and we say to you, can you explain to us what you were paying for to entity ABC, because we haven't seen any invoice purporting to be delivering something. So if you can explain this, then the recommendation is that you must recover that 20 million and put it back in the bank account, as an example. That should not take 9 months, as an example. So that's how we are going to play those periods. It will be determined by what are we dealing with. Are we dealing with a straightforward transaction, or are we dealing with a complex conundrum of provisions that need to be unpacked in order to get to the sustainable answer with regards to that? It could be a huge road construction project. It could be a huge infrastructure delivery project for water and all sorts of things. But on the other hand, it could be a third-party service provider who was trying out his business and got a contract, but now needs to be helped in order to start up. Let's say you give them a 10 million prepayment, as an example. So those are the kind of things that we'll take into account, and I'm sure as we ramp up with the next year, we would have firmed up a lot of these dates, and we would have put in place this external body of people that we will also source externally from the office, who will become part of that adjudication mechanism come the point when we are ready to issue a certificate of debt. So there's still work that we're doing here, and that's why we say that if you look at most laws that were agreed to and signed in March, many of them have not even left the out tray after they were signed, but ours has already left the out tray. It's already in motion. So we are now also making sure that we are reasonable enough to take into account all sorts of natural justice provisions in dealing with this matter, so that people do not say, I was not given sufficient time to address this matter when they test this thing through their rights in court. All right? Okay. Thanks. Then, Linda, on the other side, with regards to the fruitless and wasteful, you are spot on there with regards to the 849 million relating to 223 auditees, and you will find further detailed reference as to the many contributors on page 99 of the report.
On page, excuse me interrupting, on page, the mentions made of 758 million, which could be added to the figure if you take into account the outstanding. So it could be more than the 849. I'm trying to check that.
Yeah, no, that's exactly the point, yeah.
Right.
Because for as long as you've got auditees that have not been signed off, and you know that historically they've always had that type of expenditure.
Okay.
So that expenditure that you've got there, which is based on actual financial signed quote interest.
Okay. Also, just another thing is the number of auditees that are included in your report here.
432 in total.
But now it mentions there's 770.
Where?
Page 19, I think. Yeah, page 19, 770.
770.
Oh, yeah, I don't know. I just don't know what figure to use there.
Where's that?
There's glitch on page 19. It's supposed to be 432. We can sort it out, but the definite number is 432. 432, yeah. That's a gremlin there. There's no 770. I can stand out here now and say it's wrong.
Okay, thank you.
And then your unauthorized expenditure is 1.4 billion, as you have read it. And the detail is on page 98 of the key contributors to that. All right? Yeah.
Victoria, do you have any questions?
Good afternoon. From Victoria, we don't have any question. Back to you.
Thanks. We'll take the last round. Dumasa, you covered. Thanks. In the absence of any questions, the AG will wrap up and we'll do one-on-ones afterwards. Thanks again.
One more question. Would you say would you say that the Gauteng has regressed?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, thank you very much. As I said, in terms of these amendments, again, when you look at municipalities, we are signing off on municipalities' financial statements next week, and we are reporting the general report on municipalities in the first, towards the second quarter of next year, after we've done the analysis similarly. But we do believe that there's two things that stand out in terms of this year's audit. There hasn't been any improvement in a number of places if you look at them overall. The area of disciplines of internal control is still the major challenge across the system, and we think that at the outset, when we interact with all of these entities at different places, we are going to be focusing the attention on these preventative controls, because if you think about preventative controls, these are the controls that are already paid for, in the sense that the people that were envisaged to help protect the public purse are already in those positions. It's not a case of you must now get thousands of new people to come and do preventative controls. You might just want to check whether they have what it takes to put those preventative controls in place. But it's something that I think we need to think about carefully, even if we look at our state-owned entities. If you don't prevent the weaknesses that we identify in internal controls, they, after a number of years, become the billions of money that are needed to help them continue in their operations. So we'd like to thank you for this, and we know that, as you have done before, you've always placed a lot of emphasis on the matters that we think are prominent without belittling any others that you might want to write about. But the general report that we've presented today has got all of that detail, and we look forward to further interactions with yourselves. Thank you very much.
Just remember that paragraph I was trying to say. The list is 717.
So Auditor-General there, Kimi Makwetu, just giving the media an update on the national and provincial audit outcomes, the latest ones that he's been looking at, and basically government is still not doing well in the area of management of public finances. He talked about irregular expenditure of about 62.2 billion rand, talked about fruitless and wasteful expenditure of some 849 million rand. The distinction between the two basically being that irregular expenditure is where government spends, but you can't find the paperwork trail as to what they were spending on, and it could be quite legitimate spending, whereas with fruitless and wasteful expenditure, it just means it's just completely wasted money. So we're not doing very well in that regard. He's saying that he's pushing for better measures to be put in place, particularly at the parliament level, which has oversight over government departments. We're going to go for a quick break.